The year was 1874, and winter came early that year, sweeping across the high plains with a wind that sang like sorrow through the broken pickets of forgotten fences. Thatcher Holt stood in the barn doorway, a nail clenched between his teeth, squinting toward the pale gray ridge where the sky pressed down heavy with snow. He'd known many winters, but this one felt different. Lonelier, perhaps. Or maybe it was just the silence that filled the house behind him. For years hollow since Clara passed, the silence no longer peaceful, but waiting. That afternoon, he didn't expect the knock. It came soft, 3 hesitant taps on old oak, nearly stolen by the wind. He turned slowly, as if any sudden motion might scare it off. No riders had passed in days. No wagons. No neighbors within 8 miles. He hadn't spoken to a soul all week. Thatcher approached the door like a man approaching a grave that might still breathe. When he opened it, the world shifted. A woman stood there in a brown cloak that had clearly known better years. Her face was red from cold, but her chin didn't tremble. She was perhaps 30, though hardship had lined her mouth with early worry. Storm gray eyes met his, steady. But it wasn't her he noticed first. It was the 2 small girls clinging to the sides of her skirt, blonde heads lowered, shoes damp, fingers blue at the knuckles. "I was told," the woman said, her voice rough from wind or pride, "you needed a cook." Thatcher said nothing. "I don't want charity," she continued. "I'll work for free. My whole life, if I have to. Just shelter. For them." One of the girls peeked up. Big blue eyes. A twin, her mirror image on the other side of the skirt shifted shyly, but didn't look up. He looked behind her. No wagon. No horse. Just boot prints stretching backward down the trail like a story too sad to tell. "You got a name?" he asked. "Willa May Carrington." He stepped aside. She didn't hesitate, only guided her daughters gently forward into the warmth. The twins stepped in first, uncertain, like wild colts nosing unfamiliar hay. Willa followed last. When the door closed behind her, it seemed to echo louder than usual, as though the house had just exhaled for the first time in years. Inside, the hearth was still warm, but barely. A pot of beans simmered, untouched. The girls pressed close to it like moths to a lantern. Willa removed her cloak and laid it near the fire without being asked. Her dress was simple, worn at the hem. She knelt and unwrapped the girls' scarves, revealing soft cheeks mottled pink from frost. No one spoke. The only sound was the snap of the fire and a little cough from one of the girls. Thatcher watched from the far side of the room, arms crossed, jaw set. He wasn't a man easily stirred, but something about the way Willa tucked her girls close, checking each hand for frostbite with careful thumbs, stirred some old ache in him. Something that had nothing to do with cooking. "I'll sleep by the fire," she said. "We'll be gone come spring, if you want us gone." He didn't answer that. Instead, he said, "What are their names?" "Rosie and Ruthie." The girls looked up at the sound of their names, but remained quiet. "They're good girls. They don't cry. Not unless they're hurt." He nodded once, not knowing what to say. Then he walked past them toward the pantry, pulled out flour and lard, set them on the table, and walked away. No instructions. Just gesture. Willa understood. She tied on the apron hanging behind the stove. The girls sat nearby, small and drowsy. She worked without speaking, hands familiar with biscuits and cornbread, movements instinctual. She didn't try to prove herself. She just cooked. The scent rose slowly, butter, warmth, memory. Something thawed inside Thatcher. Not enough to speak, but enough to sit down. When she set the cornbread down, she placed the first slices in front of her girls, then placed one near Thatcher's elbow. "Eat while it's hot," she said softly. He hesitated. Then he picked up the warm slice and took a bite. It had flavor, not just salt and flour, but intention. The kind of food a woman made when she was building something. Safety, maybe. Or trust. The girls ate quietly. Willa didn't touch her own portion until they'd finished theirs. Outside, snow began to fall again. Gentle at first, then heavier. The house groaned as the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. But inside it was calm. Still. A fire's glow cast long shadows across the floor, and the girls leaned against their mother, full-bellied and half asleep. "You been walking long?" Thatcher asked, surprising himself. Willa looked up. "Since morning. We were thrown out yesterday. Spent the night in an old barn." Thrown out. The words settled like a stone in the room. She didn't elaborate. He didn't ask. The wind howled again, and the smaller twin flinched in her sleep. Willa adjusted her cloak over them, smoothing their hair. "Their uncle said I was no good, that I gave his brother daughters, not sons." Thatcher's jaw tightened. "I told him daughters grow hearts that don't rot." Her voice cracked. Just once. Then silence. After a while, Willa began clearing the table. She moved with quiet efficiency, like a woman used to being invisible when she worked. Thatcher didn't stop her. The girls were asleep by the hearth. Willa sat beside them, arms curled around their tiny bodies. She pulled her own shawl over them like a tent. "You don't owe me anything," she said softly, not looking at him. "I know. Still," she added, "I'll sweep, cook, so mend. If I don't know something, I'll learn." Thatcher stood there, arms hanging loose now, something unreadable in his eyes. "I ain't a kind man," he said finally. She didn't answer that. But she looked up at him, those storm-gray eyes steady, not begging. "I didn't come looking for kindness, just a place to keep them warm." The wind whistled through a chink in the window pane. Thatcher crossed the room, fetched an old wool blanket from the chest, and handed it to her. Their hands didn't touch, but they came close. She took it without a word and tucked it around her girls. That night, Thatcher barely slept. The wind pushed and scraped at the cabin walls, but inside the hearth stayed lit longer than usual. In the early hours, when he rose to check the fire, he found Willa awake, sitting cross-legged near the twins, sewing a tear in one of their sleeves. She didn't notice him. Her face was lit by firelight, softened, tired, but full of something that looked a little like peace. He didn't speak, just watched. He didn't know it yet, but something had already changed. In the morning, he rose before dawn and left to check the south fence. When he came back, the smell of frying cornmeal and eggs greeted him at the door. The girls were dressed, their hair braided, their cheeks glowing. Willa didn't turn as he entered. She just poured coffee into the cup he always used, set it on the table, said nothing. And just like that, it became routine. 2 days passed, then 3. By the 4th morning, the wind died down, and a rare quiet settled over the prairie. The kind of stillness that made a man feel both grateful and nervous. Willa hung laundry Thatcher hadn't worn in years, Clara's old linens, long packed away. She mended them silently, her stitches even and firm. He came up behind her once to hand her a new spool of thread. She didn't flinch, just looked up and smiled. Not brightly, not seeking approval, just a small, tired, truthful smile. That evening, the twins brought him a flower they'd found frozen in the snow, more stick than bloom. "For you," Rosie said. He took it. It was nothing, but it wasn't nothing. That night, Willa sat again by the fire, girls asleep in her lap. She watched the flames, her shoulders sagging in a way that said she'd been strong too long. "I used to dream of a home," she whispered, as though speaking to the flames. "Not a big one, just where I didn't feel like a guest." Thatcher, leaning in the shadows, didn't move, didn't speak. But the wind howled again outside, and this time no one flinched. The cabin had learned a new sound, breathing. And in that small, quiet moment, when Willa pressed her cheek to Ruthie's head, Thatcher knew what he'd seen at the door wasn't pity. It was need, but not just hers. His, too. The next morning, he didn't go to the barn. He stood by the kitchen door instead, watching the 3 of them from behind the screen, as Willa braided the twins' hair with patient fingers and a soft hum, sunlight pooling across the worn floorboards like hope coming in slow. She didn't see him watching, but the smile on his face came anyway. Small, unwilling, real. That afternoon, Thatcher rode into town. He returned with a spool of red ribbon and 3 sets of boots. He never said a word about them, just left them by the fire. But when Willa saw them, her hands trembled, and she didn't cry. She just tucked the boots near the girls, then turned back to the stove, lips pressed tight, shoulders shaking like a woman who hadn't been seen in a very long time, and finally was. And that night, as the last snow fell quiet outside, the door that once stood between them no longer felt like a barrier. It felt like a beginning. By the time the ice thawed along the fence posts and robins returned to sing over chimney soot, the house had begun to change. Not all at once, not like a door slamming shut, but like slow light climbing across the floor at sunrise, unnoticed until it covered everything. Willa May Carrington rose early, as she always had, brushing ash from the hearth before even the rooster stirred. Her hands bore the quiet marks of labor, raw knuckles, a finger still bandaged from when the kettle slipped, but she never winced. Each bruise, each callus, seemed to make her more rooted to the land beneath her boots, to the boards of the house, to the man whose silence had softened by degrees. Rosie and Ruthie bloomed like prairie blossoms in spring, fragile, bright, surprising. Thatcher often found them perched on the fence like little sparrows, hair braided, boots he'd bought now scuffed with good use. He never called them his daughters, but then he'd never needed to. The way his eyes lingered when they giggled, the way he carved 2 tiny wooden chairs for them at the table, that said more than names ever could. But Willa remained a mystery to most in town. At the Mercantile, she was polite but distant. Some whispered that she was still only his cook. Others hinted she must have tricked him. Women with tighter corsets and easier lives said, "It's pity, not love. A man like that just needs a warm meal and obedient hands." She heard it all, never flinched. She didn't need to. Her worth wasn't anchored in the town's tongue, but in her daughter's laughter, the way Thatcher drank every cup of coffee she placed in front of him, and how, without words, he'd started waiting to eat until she sat down too. Still, something in her held back. Every time Thatcher entered the room, her spine straightened, her hands moved faster. She never lingered near the table once the plates were cleared. She thanked him too often. She didn't know how to rest, not yet. One afternoon, the twins fell asleep in a sunbeam beside the barn. Thatcher found Willa on her knees, scrubbing old saddle leather until her nails bled. "You don't need to do that," he said. She looked up, blinking into the light, cheeks flushed. "I know." Then why did she look like a woman still waiting to be sent away? He walked off without answering the question in his own chest. That night, thunder rolled low in the hills. The roof, patched but worn, began to leak above the kitchen. Willa fetched a tin basin, placed it beneath the drip, and sat beside it until morning. Thatcher saw her there, knees drawn to her chest, head tipped against the wall. The basin between them echoed, each drop like a drumbeat, counting a sorrow she never voiced. At dawn he was already on the roof with nails, hammer in hand, sleeves rolled to his elbows. Willa brought him coffee, then a jar of pitch. When he slipped and caught himself on the gutter, she cried out, hand flying to her chest. "You all right?" she called. "I'm fine." But when he looked down, she was watching him with something raw in her gaze. Not fear, not worry, attachment. He finished the job in silence, came down, and without a word, took the empty jar from her hands. That evening, something shifted. He noticed it first when she stayed at the table after supper. The girls were already tucked in. Outside, the last of the storm clouds hung purple and bruised. She sat opposite him, her hands wrapped around a mug she didn't drink from. "I wanted to be a wife," she said quietly. "Not a burden, not a mouth to feed. I thought if I worked hard enough, maybe you'd see I was useful." He didn't speak, just let the fire crackle. She looked into it as though it might tell her what to say. "I'm not sure I know how to be wanted," she added. That was when Thatcher reached across the table, not quickly, not dramatically, and placed his hand over hers. It wasn't romantic, it was reverent, and Willa's breath caught. The days that followed wore a gentler rhythm. Thatcher brought her fresh bread from the town bakery on Sundays. Willa took the twins to gather wildflowers near the brook. One morning, Ruthie brought home a baby bird with a bent wing. Willa made a bed for it in a box lined with cotton. For the next 2 weeks, Thatcher checked on it every night after the girls fell asleep. He didn't speak to the bird, but he left crumbs, and once a scrap of flannel for warmth. And when the bird flew at last, he watched it go with a furrowed brow, as if letting go still didn't come easy. The townsfolk began to notice. Beatrice, the midwife, told everyone at the Sunday service, "She ain't just cooking for him. She's softening him." I saw him pat her daughter's head, like it meant something. It spread quick. By the next market day, folks were watching. Some with amusement, some with contempt. One woman muttered loud enough for Willa to hear, "She's playing house, but she ain't his wife." Willa didn't respond. But that night, she sat by the fire longer than usual. Her fingers didn't move, just rested in her lap, like she didn't know what to do with them anymore. Thatcher watched her. After a long silence, he said, "Let them talk." She looked up, startled. "They don't see what I see," he added. She didn't answer, but her eyes were wet, and this time she didn't wipe them away. Later that week, a peddler rode up with a wagon full of scraps and odds. Thatcher came out with coin, bought fabric without asking. He laid it on the table. "Red," he said, "for the girls, and blue, for you." Willa touched the cloth like it might disappear. "I ain't had a new dress since before my husband passed." "Well, that needs changing." She turned away then, suddenly, and he didn't follow. But that night, she stood at the threshold of his room, holding a threadbare shirt she'd mended. She set it on his dresser and said, "Thank you for seeing us." Then she walked away. He didn't sleep much. By dawn, the house smelled of cinnamon. Willa was baking, apron dusted white, hair loose around her shoulders. The girls ran circles through the kitchen, chasing each other with wooden spoons. He leaned against the doorway, arms folded, taking it in like a man watching spring through a window after too long a winter. "You ever think about marrying again?" she asked back to him. "I used to," he said. "Then I stopped." She nodded. "Why?" "Didn't think I'd find a woman strong enough to live up to Clara." He regretted the words the moment they landed. But Willa didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled soft and sure. "You didn't. You found someone different." That night, he didn't light a fire in his own room. He waited instead by the hearth, as the girls slept in their usual corner. Willa came in slowly, unsure. He held something in his hand, a ring. Old silver, worn smooth by time. "It was my mother's," he said. "She had hands like yours. Kind ones." Willa stared at it, not reaching. "I need more than a cook," he said. "I need what this house has become." She moved forward then, one step at a time, until her fingers rested against his palm, trembling. "You sure?" she whispered. "I've never been more sure." And in the fire's glow, he slipped it on her finger, and her breath hitched. But she didn't cry. Not until the girls woke and saw it. Rosie gasped. "Mom, are we staying?" Willa knelt and pulled them into her arms. "Yes," she whispered. "We're staying." The three of them wept together, and Thatcher, hands still calloused, heart still healing, just stood there, watching, like a man who finally understood the house hadn't chosen him. It had chosen them all,